Right, good evening everybody, and thank you for attending this Christmas meeting of the Governance Committee. I was going to put a Christmas jumper on, but I forgot. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Councillor Ian Watkinson and I'm the chair of this committee. Councillor Colin Sharples is the vice chair. Please note this is an audio and video meeting. It's been recorded and the stream will also be live on YouTube. The web address for this is displayed on the agenda for the meeting and can be found on the Council's website as well. Members are asked to keep their microphone on mute and only unmute when they wish to speak. Members and officers present in the Shield Room are also asked to ensure that they keep their microphones switched off unless they're speaking, and to mute themselves afterwards in order to avoid any feedback. Only one microphone across both the Shield Room and Microsoft Teams can be activated at any one time. Reports will be presented by officers, after which I'll bring the report back into committee. If any member of the committee wishes to speak on an item, you should use the raise your hand feature or the chat function in the top right hand corner to notify our moderator that you wish to speak. I will then invite you in order. After committee has considered the report, I will invite comments from members not on the committee. If the technology fails for any member on committee, then I will adjourn the meeting for several minutes to try and resolve the issue. With Councillor Sharples and myself in the Shield Room, we have committee members Councillor David Bretherton, Councillor Colin Clark, Councillor Margaret Smith, and our officers Gary Hall, Chris Moister and Darren Cranshaw. Please can I ask for members on committee who have dialed in this evening to confirm that they can see and hear. So Councillor Amelia.
Yes, I can hear and see. Thank you.
Very good, thanks. And Councillor Turner.
Yes, can see and hear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can I ask our officers and guests dialing in to confirm that they can see and hear also? So James Thompson.
Yes, I can confirm I can see and hear you.
Thanks a lot. Tony Ferber.
Yes, Chair, I can see and hear, yes.
Marvellous. And Mark Stocks from Grant Thornton.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, right, that's the preamble done, so we can crack on. So moving on to the agenda and item number 1. Do we have any apologies, please? Okay, no apologies, thank you very much. Item number 2, declarations of interest. As this is a hybrid meeting, if a member has a pecuniary interest, they are requested to leave the meeting completely rather than just mute their microphone. The member can rejoin the meeting following the completion of the item in question. Does anyone have any interest to declare? No? Moving on, item 3, minutes of the last meeting. I have the minutes of the last meeting in front of me for approval. Do we have a seconder? Thank you very much. Do we have any queries on the minutes at all? Councillor Bretherton.
Yeah, hi. It's just regarding page 6. It was resolved. Officers going to. There's further information on the 2 institutions will be provided outside of the meeting. It was just a query raised regarding 2 banks. Further information was provided to members in respect of AI Rayan Bank and Sum Itomo Mitsubishi Banking Corporation. I've not received anything. I'm just wondering if anybody else has, or whether information has been issued.
Tony, is that something that you want to come in on now, or is that something that will be covered?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, sorry. Sorry. The only answer I can give is I apologise. It has been overlooked. The rest of the agenda, the rest of this evening has taken rather a lot of time. So yeah, my apologies, Councillor, that hasn't actually yet been sent out, but we will attend to it.
Councillor Clark.
Just to point out 2 typos, that was all. Page 4, penultimate paragraph, deadline for went, I think that should be when. And on the following page, page 5, under audit plan, the end of the second paragraph, 2 pasts. I think that should be 2 posts. I'm not the proofreader, you know, for these minutes. That's an officer's responsibility.
It's good to keep you on your toes though, Colin. Thanks for that.
Just to show I've read them out.
Thanks a lot. Anything else from the minutes? I'll say that again. No? Okay. I'll sign those and pass those on down. Okay, so...
Chair,
Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Mrs Smith, I didn't see you there.
thank you. It's not on the minutes, Mr. Chairman, but I would like to just make a comment that I feel that the amount of paperwork that has actually come through the door in the last few days has been quite overwhelming. And to do justice, as this governance committee needs to do justice to the paperwork, I do think that the amount of time that has been allowed for us to digest this paperwork really, I don't know whether you agree with me, but it really has been something that I don't think or feel that we will do proper justice to this evening because of the volume of it. I just thought I felt concerned, and I would like to just make sure that it is on record that I don't think we should be subjected to this again. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. I would sincerely hope that none of us are subjected to this situation again, and duly noted. Okay, so moving on to item number 4, Audit Findings Report 2018-2019. I'll take this item and item 4A together. Members are advised that there has been a supplementary agenda published for this item. Page 237 in your pack includes the External Auditor's Independent Report on the audit of financial statements. So, can I ask Mark to present this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is the audit findings report for the 2018-19 financial statements. I'll take you through this report mainly on a page-by-page basis due to the seriousness of some of the findings within the report. If I can just start by going through, starting on page 3. So page 3 is a summary of our work on the financial statements. The work was completed, as you're aware, between sort of we started in 2019 and then paused for a period of time, and I'll come back to the reasons for that in a moment. And then obviously we picked up again in August to November, and then the paper was issued to you in early December. So in terms of the financial statements audit, there are 2 significant errors within the financial statements. They're not material to the financial statements, but they are of a sizable amount. There's one with regard to an under provision in terms of pension liabilities, and then there's another with regard to an over provision in terms of business rate appeals. My view is that they're mainly offsetting, and so overall there's not a material issue within the financial statements. The council's chosen not to adjust for those items. At the start of the audit, we were made aware that there was potentially management override of control within the council. We take that extremely seriously. It's an area where we've seen fraud happen previously, or at least financial misreporting. So when that is reported to us, we do take that with the utmost seriousness. So on the back of that, we did change our materiality levels, but again, I'll come back to that in a minute. One of the items that I'll talk to as I go through the report is potential pension liability with regard to leisure services contracts. I have to note that I do think the management of that has been poor. There wasn't an awareness of that within the council when I raised the issue, and potentially that liability is significant. The council is working on that at the moment to try and reduce any risk to it, but that has gone into the council's financial statements as a contingent liability. One of the things just to flag to you, it's not a misstatement within the financial statements, but it is sort of a loss of public funding. So when we looked at the health and wellbeing campus, your internal auditor had reported that there was a level of abortive costs within there due to the council's poor management of the process, and that loss to the public is somewhere in the region of £275,000. At the last meeting, we discussed sort of the delays in the audit and why the work had been paused. So what I've tried to do in the next few paragraphs is just outline the reasons for that. And there are a number of reasons, as you can see. So there clearly have been significant governance failings at the council. So when we started the audit in 2019 and these started to become identified by the council and ourselves, we did pause the audit. And it's also taken me a significant amount of time and my team to try and understand sort of what the import of those governance issues are, because they are significant and they are a serious failure. In terms of control issues, I referred earlier to the management override of control. We have had to reduce our materiality levels significantly because of that. And there are sort of, underlying weaknesses within the council's financial statements, financial processes. And so that means that we have to test more. And that's a significant burden on both ourselves, but particularly on the council's officers who have to respond to more queries and to do more sample testing with us. The third item is the pension issue that I referred to. Clearly at £2 million, that's a significant potential liability for the council. So we needed to go through that in some detail to understand why that had occurred and why there wasn't a general awareness in the council of that amount. Then COVID, obviously COVID has impacted on us as it has with everybody else. We've had to undertake the audit remotely. I have to say Tony and Hannah, who've been supporting us during the audit, have been absolutely fantastic, but it has taken time to get through the process to get you to this position. In terms of audit quality, the Financial Reporting Council have made it clear that we need to focus on audit quality and to make sure that the work is done properly. So that's what we do. We take the time that we need to get the work done, and unfortunately that has delayed the process more than I would have wanted. Clearly, there's been significant changes within the audit team over the past year and a half. That's unavoidable, but that has created delays as well. So while I understand sort of members' frustration around the papers not being quite as timely as you would have liked, given the significant governance and control failures at this council, it was more important to me to make sure that we did the audit appropriately than perhaps to get these papers to you with more time than I've been able to. So in terms of the financial statements, I would intend to issue an unqualified opinion on the financial statements. The audit is now complete, subject to receiving a management letter of representation and the signed statements, which has been arranged for tomorrow. We will be able to close the 2018-19 financial statements work. Just moving on to page 5, if I can. Page 5 gives a summary of the value for money arrangements and the sort of the work that we've looked at. And I'd intend to issue an adverse value for money conclusion on the council. So there's been, as I said earlier, there's been significant governance, control and service failures throughout 2018-19. In terms of financial sustainability, I actually think the council's arrangements are appropriate. But with regard to governance, controls, services, I don't. So we will be issuing an adverse value for money conclusion with regard to those areas. Bottom of page 5, I start to discuss our statutory powers. And we have a number of powers available to us, so where we think things are of such significance that we need to take further action. So I would intend to issue a section 24 recommendation with regard to a number of aspects of the council's management of its services, and I will come to those as I work through the report. So that's a summary of the work that we've done over the past few months, and I'll take members through sort of the significant points in the report, just so you can, I suppose, take the time that you need to understand what we're saying. So if I could just take you to page 8. Page 8, the main point on page 8 is the management override of control. So one of the things that we look at there is journal control and how they operate. Our substantive testing hasn't identified any management override of control, but I do need to point out to you a significant weakness within your control environments. Journals are used to support your management accounts, to move sort of income and expenditure from one place to another to improve accurate reporting. But it is important that those controls, that there are controls in over journals to make sure that they're not used inappropriately. The council has no journal limits, and journals don't require authorisation by a second officer. I consider that to be a significant weakness and failure in control. It does give the opportunity for officers to move transactions to where they want without supervision. If I can take members down to page 9. So page 9 deals with the valuation of land and buildings. I'm happy with the value that's within the financial statements. We've tested that quite rigorously with the support of the finance team. So I'm happy that it's fairly stated. What I would like to just raise with you is that there's a cyclical programme of review. So, and CIPFA recommends that an average of 20% of assets are revalued on a 5-year basis. At the 31st of March, approximately £17 million of the council's £24 million of assets hadn't been revalued. We have been able to get surety because of the desktop valuation undertaken by the council's valuer, but I do think that process needs to be improved. I can just take members down to page 10. Page 10 just deals with pensions. Pensions are significant estimates. They're complex and they're difficult to get to the right estimate. One of the issues that came out in 1819 was the McLeod judgment, which was around sort of potential discrimination within sort of pension payments. And we estimate that somewhere around the liabilities have been underestimated by somewhere in the region of £380,000. Just moving down then to page 11. Page 11 deals with business rate appeals. Again, business rate appeals are complex estimates within the financial statements. It is difficult to arrive at at an appropriate figure, particularly with the There's not a great deal against those, but CIPFA do recommend that councils prepare and put in a provision against potential future appeals, because usually by the time you're coming to an end of a listing, when the government introduces a new sort of form of NDR, then more appeals come through. The council's provision isn't inappropriate. It's not materially misstated. I think it's perhaps sort of overly prudent. That has been corrected in the 2019-20 financial statements, but I just flag it to members for their attention. I can just take you now down to page 17. Page 17 deals with going concern. So I think it's important just to pause on this, given what's happening across the country, not only with business but also with some councils. And just to report that, I've looked in detail at the council's financial plans and its reserves, and there are no issues in terms of the council continuing to be a going concern. Just moving on to page 18. So page 18 and 19 deal in detail with the accounting for the leisure service pension liabilities. It is a complex area, and the contracts that were let when the leisure services transferred over to South Ribble Community Leisure Limited aren't all that clear. It does appear from reading them that the liability ought to sit with the trust and potentially with Serco. I don't actually believe that the trust has sufficient sort of resources to actually meet that liability. So it would fall to Serco to meet that pension liability. There was supposed to be a bond that was in place throughout the period of the contract, and the council and the pension authority were supposed to be monitoring that on a regular basis and making sure that the bond covered the pension liability. Clearly, that's not happened. So as we sit here today, then the council will need to enter into negotiations with the Leisure Trust and Serco at the end of between now and the end of the leisure services contract to determine whether there is a liability that it needs to meet, or whether Serco and the trust will be meeting that liability. Just moving on to page 20. On page 20, we just sort of highlight some of the control issues that have been flagged by your internal auditor. We've already discussed sort of journals. But there are issues around sort of procurement, but also around sort of creditors as well. And it is a significant concern that the council wasn't operating an appropriate control environment throughout 2018-19. It's something that I rarely see. Members, I've been doing this for over 30 years now, and it's quite rare that a council's control environment isn't operating appropriately. That's all I wanted to say on the financial statements audit. If I can move us down now, I'll take us to the value for money conclusion, which is detailed from pages 25 onwards, and I'll talk you through some detail in this. So page 27 deals with financial sustainability, pages 27 to 29. I'm not going to go into this in any detail. As I said, under going concern, I think the council is robust financially, has sufficient reserves, and I can see that it's been well managed financially throughout 2018-19 and comes out of it with a strong level of reserves. If I could just take you on to page 30. We start to draw out some of the issues on page 30 and 31 with regard to the governance of the council in 2018-19. So I'm not going to talk to those pages, but I'm going to talk to perhaps the individual pages and just sort of draw out some of the concerns that we have that have led to an adverse conclusion on value for money. So on page 32, we deal with service performance, and there are a number of issues that they're to flag there in terms of the performance of individual departments. Many of them have been raised by either independent investigators or by the council's own review or by internal audit. But I suppose just the level of services that haven't operated in an effective way is just poor. And so, there is the council does need to take action to make sure that that these areas are reviewed and actioned, and that the implementation plans that have been sort of identified following the internal audit reviews are actually put into place. Just turning on to page 33, one of the things we look for to determine whether a council's well governed is its performance monitoring and the reliability of the information that it uses in forming its decision. Clearly, the council's aware that its internal audit team questioned the validity of the data that was used in 2018-19. And, you know, when we've looked at some of the performance data that has been used, we found that it's not particularly service focused in the way that it's actually used. This is an area that I think management have taken particularly seriously, and we can see that sort of new performance systems are being put in place, particularly the corporate strategy and performance framework and the quarterly monitoring. So we can see the movement and the action that the council's taking, but in 2018-19 this was poor. Just moving over onto page 34, this deals with some of the issues that we were talking about in terms of the council's control environment. You can see that issues are flagged around credit system and how that's controlled, about the management of the health and well-being campus, around procurement of gas and electricity contracts, and around GDPR. And I think GDPR is of a significant concern given the level of fines that can be levelled against the council for non-compliance. We followed these issues up, and you can see at the bottom of page 34 that we kind of highlight where management's got to. I think there is a level of urgency around creditors, around the council doing a review to make sure that those systems are operating effectively now. As I flagged at the beginning, in terms of the health in the region of £275,000. We've looked in detail at procurement. That seems to have been strengthened.
Mark, we're having some problem. Mark, we're just to alert you. Mark, just to alert you that you just dropped out a few times there, so I'm not sure if there's a problem at your end, but maybe get. I don't know,
Chair. Do I need to? Would you like me to go back over that section?
Just from procurement, I think, yeah, and just get your coat hanger on standby. It's
okay.
All right.
So procurement. We can see that the council has made progress. We looked at at 5 significant contracts that had been let since some of the issues in 18-19, and we were happy in terms of the award of those contracts. So again, we can see progress around procurement, and similarly on GDPR, we can see that the action's now being taken by the council. But in terms of our reflection on 2018-19, clearly the council's control environment was inadequate. So we're just moving on to page 36. So page 36 deals with both, I suppose, the capability of officers and internal audit. In terms of officers, there were clearly significant performance concerns during 2018-19 and into 19-20 as well. I have significant concerns about the level of changes in senior officers during that period, and in particularly in terms of the section 151, while there's some stability with the current deputy, you've had 6 directors of finance in that period, and so you're never going to move forward, without a substantive post holder and with that level of management change. So in terms of internal audit, that was a difficult area for us to discern what the actual issues were and to try and form a judgment on. We did have some concerns just about some of the investigations that had been done by internal audit. I know the independent investigator that had worked for the council felt that some of those reviews had stepped over the mark, and there was also some significant differences in opinion between the independent investigator and the internal auditor. So, without doing a significant and substantial level of review, I can't tell you which one of those was right, but it is rather unsettling. And I suppose looking to where we are now, the Council doesn't have a permanent internal auditor, and it's only recently agreed a plan for 2021. So there's some significant things the Council does need to look at in terms of internal audit. Moving on the page to page 37, one of the things we look at when we look at governance is the relationship between officers and members. It's important in terms of the council and how well run it is, and in terms of its ability to do business. For 1819, it was a significant concern to me to note that there was a poor relationship with the then opposition group and the then chief executive. I understand some of the issues that had arisen and why that may be the case, but it is disconcerting to find officers and members not working together constructively. We can see progress. There's clearly been less complaints. There's sort of, and we note that there's been a protocol adopted for working between members and officers, so we think that's positive. Two areas, I suppose, or two comments from me. One, I think it's important that members challenge appropriately at meetings, so and that they are aware of their impact on officers when they do so. And I was disappointed to note that some members haven't signed up to the officer member protocol. Moving on to page 38. As part of its initial, I suppose, review of governance, the council put in place the improvement reference group in 2018-19. Unfortunately, that seems to have become rather a contentious group, where there's been issues over the progress that's been made, and it's caused contention between opposition, or then opposition party, and the ex-chief executive in terms of what had arisen. So it's sort of, I suppose the positive from that is that process has come to an end, probably an earlier end than I would have anticipated. But I do think the AGS gives the council an appropriate template to work from in terms of trying to understand the governance issues that it needs to resolve in the next 12 to 18 months. Just moving on to page 39. Page 39 deals with the governance around the ex-chief executive, and I'm going to be rather careful here because I know this is subject to a tribunal and I don't want to influence that tribunal in any way. So I'm not going to say a lot really. So I note that the leader didn't have the power to actually suspend the chief executive at the time. I note that was put right very quickly, but I do think that's overstepping the mark in terms of the action that was taken. We did look at the accusation around a leak to the press, but I didn't think there was any foundation to that. And as I said, the rest of it I think is down to the tribunal, so we'll see what the outcome is of that. Just moving on to page 40 then, Chair. So this gives, I suppose, a summary of where we got to. I think the council has been open and transparent in terms of highlighting the governance failures that occurred during 1819 and which, at least in part, continued into 1920. And we can see that there's a robust action plan in place to take things forward, and we can see some of the changes that are now being put in place in terms of the transformation plan and the organisational development strategy. I think finally from me, just before I move on to the section 24 recommendations, is that I've rarely seen this in my career. So where there's been such a fundamental breakdown, not only in the governance arrangements of a council, but also in its service performance and in terms of its control environment, it's really important that members take this seriously and drive forward in terms of how they're going to put the improvements in place that are going to make a difference for the people of South Ribble. Finally, for me, Chair, if I can just move members on to page 421. So page 441 is a formal recommendation under section 24 of the Local Audit and Accountability Act 2014. There's a requirement for the council to respond to this formally and in public. I'm sure we'll arrange that in the new year. And the recommendation is that the council makes demonstrable progress in a number of areas around its service performance, around strengthening its financial control environment, in ensuring that working relationships between officers and members are appropriate, and in putting in place a permanent Section 151 officer. Chair, I'm aware that I've talked for a while now, so I don't apologise for that. I think it's important that I talk to you about the story of the audit and why it's taken so long, and some of our concerns with regard to what's happened at South Ribble in 2018 and into 2019-20. I would hope the council would respond positively and promptly to the Section 24 recommendation. There are additional powers to me available under the Act, which I'll hopefully I won't have to use. I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks very much for that. Okay. Comprehensive summary there from Mark, and obviously we've had the papers and seen quite a bit of this already. So we'll take comments and questions from the committee, if there are any at this time. No? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Clark. I'm ready for that, Corey.
Mark, thanks for the report. I found it very interesting reading. But what crossed my mind when I read it was that some of the matters related to the subsequent year rather than 2019. So I wondered why you did that and didn't leave it till later when you were looking at the subsequent year.
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, echo there. So it's a good question. Is somebody on mute? Keep getting it.
Okay, far away, Mark.
Okay, sorry. Oh no, I can hear my echo. Never mind. So normally I would have made a very clear distinction between 2018 and 19. The way audit works is that we would have been doing this work in probably July, September 2019, and it would have been very simple to go, this happened then, this happened then. But because we were doing two audits at once, and I could see that the issues had spread across 2018 into 2019-20, it was easier, simpler to tell the story by just pulling the periods together. Because what I was concerned about was that you would only get the full picture of what had happened by reading one AFR alongside the other, which I didn't think would be very useful in terms of giving you a template plan to move forward.
Is that okay, Colin?
Yeah, I mean, why I asked the question was we've got two reports here tonight to consider, and you'll go on to the second one. And really, I found reading the second one, which I only glossed over, I must admit, because I only got it late last night, appears to duplicate a lot of the things you were saying in the 2018, which I think, really is, if I may say, a slight criticism of what's being presented.
They're the same issues, Councillor. So there's no point in me trying to separate 2018-19. So, these issues started in 2018, ran on into 2019-20. So the deficiencies within 2018-19 just continued. They didn't stop at 31st of March 2019. So, and some of the control issues still remain coming into this financial year. So there are sort of, so I think it's absolutely appropriate to sort of, give you a report that outlines, the governance issues and the concerns that we have both for 2018 and 2019-20.
Thanks, Mark. Any other questions, comments from the committee? Councillor Mrs. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, and thank you very much for your summary of the report. It has taken quite a lot of reading, as I said earlier, but we've finally got through it, and we can understand a lot more when someone actually takes us through it as you have done. Do you wish us to make comment about certain things now, or do you wish us just to listen to any further reports? There's one or two concerns that I do have about one or two things that are in the report, and I'm quite happy to mention them now, if that's okay.
I have no problems with that.
Fine. Thank you. You did mention, and it's on page 36, regarding the audit investigations that actually took place, and that you do have, I wouldn't say concerns, but you do mention that you thought that they were investigatory in nature and potentially breached the code of the council's standing orders. In what way do you think that they actually did possibly breach the council's standing orders? Because we have concern, I think, as a governance committee, to actually try our very best to do an audit properly and to make sure that we monitor those audits. And at this moment in time, I know that we have now appointed a chief auditor, which I am very pleased about and welcome very much. But our audit plan is still very much behind. A lot of it to do with the pandemic, I understand that. But there has been an awful lot of time spent investigating these when possibly we could have been doing the audit that would have been much more helpful to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We looked in quite a lot of detail at this and debated this with officers quite a lot. So the chief executives, as with monitoring officers and Section 151 officers, are afforded significant protections. So under the J&C model, just because of the post that they operate in, and that's appropriate that's in place. And the council's adopted those J&C procedures through its own standing orders. So what the J&C procedures say is that if there is going to be an investigation of either the chief executive or one of those senior officers, that it must be done by an independent investigator. So if you look at the titles and details of some of internal audit's reports, they're investigatory in matter, and they do deal with some of the alleged issues around the chief executive. So my view is that they're potentially in breach. I hasten to add, I am not a lawyer, but as your auditor, I think it was ill-advised to have internal audit look at those areas.
Could I just come back, please? Yes, I think it's very interesting, actually, because having read the audit report some months ago, quite a number of them, I have to say, were very subjective, and a lot of people that you would have thought that the internal auditor would have actually questioned as to how things moved around at that time were not actually interviewed. And that gave me concern, and that's why I was concerned about whether there was a breach of the standing orders. And also I am concerned, still a little bit about the energy contract. You said that you don't seem to have any problems with it. That seemed to have given the auditors particularly some concern at the time, saying that the procurement was not satisfactory. And I would just have liked to, I'm just flagging that one up as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I don't want to comment on the rigour of the internal audit reviews because I don't have that information. So, internal audit have done some good work, in my opinion, and have flagged some significant weaknesses in the council's controls. I would have to do a forensic audit of what they've done and their choices in terms of who they interviewed to form a view as to the issues around their work, if there are any. I note that the independent investigator had a difference of opinion with them. In terms of the electricity and gas procurement, well, clearly there were significant flaws in the procurement of those contracts. I'm not giving you any comfort with regard to the letting of those contracts, other than the procurement team who have looked at those contracts, your procurement team, and they considered that while there were failings in the procedures, that there isn't a loss to the council. But that's the view of your procurement team. Again, there's only so far I can go in terms of a reasonable cost and a reasonable review by ourselves for the council. So, but you'd have to make further inquiries of the procurement team.
Thanks, Mark. Chris, do you just want to come back on that point?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I did have quite lengthy exchanges with Mark over the role of internal audit in some of those, whether they're called investigations or audits. I'm comfortable, I'm happy that they were in compliance with the council's standing orders. They related to governance issues. The JNC terms and conditions relate to employment investigations, investigations into the disciplinary process in relation to statutory officers. The work that was undertaken by internal audit did overlap, but they were governance related issues that internal audit looked at. So I was happy that the standing orders weren't breached, although I understand where Mark's coming from in the statement that he's made in the findings report.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for that. Any other questions from members on the committee? Nope. Members not on the committee. Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mark, and the external auditors for the work that they've done. Nothing within the audit report comes as any surprise to me. A lot of it, the majority of it, was self-declared anyway within the annual governance statement. And I note something Mark and the auditors said earlier, and it's ringing in my ears, and it's something I've said before. This council needs to own this and get a grip of it and sort it out. It's the council's responsibility. It's no point sitting here and shouting at auditors for doing the job or shouting at internal auditors for doing the job. There was a catastrophic failure of corporate governance, and it's been demonstrated, it's been reported upon over the last 6 months, and it is now being dealt with. So I thank Mark and the auditors for the work they've done. I have no problem as leader of this council that they are slightly delayed in bringing it forward, because I wholly understand why they would do that. I would rather, Chair, it was correct and honest for the residents of South Ribble rather than rushed and perhaps not as thorough as it could be. I own this as leader of the council, and the council owns this, and we will put it right. And we are making great strides, Chair, in putting it right. Two particular issues, just small points of detail I would like to raise, Chair. The independent investigator has been mentioned a few times. I do need to make clear to the auditors and to the committee that there are a number of statements that the independent investigator made within her report that were never subject to challenge. that were fundamentally, in my view, wrong, and we'll deal with them moving forward next year. In respect to Councillor Mrs Smith and the fuel contract, what I can confirm to Councillor Mrs Smith that was inappropriate to sign that contract, and I can also confirm to Mrs Smith that that had been going on for about 18 months, the renegotiation of that contract, and it just highlights the culture, the procurement culture of this council, why it had to improve. So I thank the auditors, and as a council chair, we own this and we'll deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. Councillor Ogilvie.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick ones. In relation to the requirements on the Section 24 response, could I ask the Auditor, what are you actually expecting to hear in that response? And the second quick point is, there's mention in the report early on, you were asking some questions about £6 million investment in Royal Bank of Scotland, but you hadn't received any response to that. Could you just clarify what your issues were, and could someone answer the question why you haven't received a response yet? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I will look for the £6 million while I'm talking to you about Section 24. So Section 24 is, as I said, is a statutory recommendation which requires the council to make a formal response to us in terms of what it's going to do. So I would expect the council to formulate a response to the Section 24 recommendations, to set out what it's going to do and to communicate that to me in whatever means it feels appropriate. Probably a letter would seem to be the best way forward. But that has to be done in public, so I would expect sort of the response to be debated by full council, and a decision made in terms of the adequacy of the council's response. Could the councillor just point me to where where I've made reference to the £6 million, just so I can find it quickly? Can you remember the page, councillor?
You muted, Councillor Ogilvie. I knew I'd get the chance to say that tonight.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say I'll need to check back on my electronic paperwork myself, so my face will disappear from view while I flick onto a different screen, but I've not gone away.
Councillor Smith informs me it's page 31.
Page 31. Thank you very much.
No, maybe not. Perhaps we could, page 23. Let's try that.
Page 23. That's been received. That's now been received. So as you can imagine, in COVID times, for want of a better phrase, then we asked for the council holds a significant investment portfolio. So sometimes the banks aren't that responsive. So I have to call on the good graces of Tony and Hannah to chase them up for me. So when we issued this report on the 11th of December, then at that point we hadn't got those confirmations. I'm pleased to confirm that we now have those bank confirmations, and thank you for helping me find the page.
Thanks for that, Mark. Is that okay, Councillor Ogilvie?
Yes, thank you for that.
Thanks very much. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. On page 21, with regard to pension liability, I'm not quite sure, even if you give me the answer, I'll probably understand it, but there are some figures on there, and it's got net pension liability 60.312 million, And then in the summary of the policy itself, it says the council's total net pension liability at the 31st of March 19 was 33 million. Are we trying to say our pension liability has increased by 30 million, or is this one of the rollovers between 1 year and the next year? If you could explain that, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
You have found my typo, Councillor. So your net pension liability is 30 million. The 60 million is an erroneous figure that's made its way into the report. So I apologise for that. Your net pension liability is 30 million.
Yeah. Thank you. I thought that might be the case, but thanks for the answer. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much for that. Any other members not on committee? Okay, I think that's this item completed, and it's just a note, so there's no vote required. Moving on to agenda item number 5, the audited statement of accounts 2018 to 19 and letter of representation. Members are advised that there's been a supplementary agenda published. Page 428 in your pack includes the letter of representation. I'm going to invite James Thompson to present this item. James.
It may be me, Chair, if that's all right.
I do apologise, Tony. Of course it's all right. Crack on.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Clearly, Chair, a fair amount of time has passed since we looked at the draft statement for 2018-19, and I can actually add very little to what we covered at the time, but I do appreciate it was really quite some time ago. But I'll perhaps not do the full tour this evening unless members would wish me to. The substance of the document has aged here and there. On the whole, it's aged fairly well. Clearly, it's been an interesting time in many ways since the draft statement, and so a number of things have needed updating to reflect that. So yeah, there are some updated words, there are some new words. There is a scattering of edits and typos and miscellaneous bits and pieces, and there are the two matters which are referred to. Let's see, it's paragraph 9, which appears on page 56 of the papers. There's one change in note 33 to the numbers, and we've moved the expenditure and funding analysis around. However, beyond that, things are actually very much as they were at the end of May 2019. And to just turn to the starting point of what would be the full tour without actually going through all of it, if we go to page 101, then we have there the expenditure and funding analysis in its new position. But the bottom line there, the closing general fund balance for the year, 19.519 million. It is worth emphasising that is exactly where it stood 18.5 months ago. And then if we go to page 122, there you'll find the split of that between just over £14.8 million of earmarked reserves and just short of £4.7 million of general reserve. And again, those figures are unchanged. I'll stop the tour at that point, Chair, if that's all right. I mean, as I say, if members do wish me to go into greater depth and link the statements together, and that as we did do at the time of the draft statement, I'm quite happy to do that. But beyond that, the focus of the covering report is very much on the requirements and formalities of the remaining process. And yes, in the recommendation, members are asked to consider the statement and its associated letter of representation for approval. The letter of representation is in a form which I'm sure members will have encountered before. It's fairly lengthy. It's not the most riveting of documents, even by statement of accounts standards, but there is a requirement that these representations must be made to the auditor and that formally signed off. So, as is set out in paragraph 2 of the covering report, approval tonight would be given subject to delegation of any further minor amendments to the chair of the committee and the section 151 officer. Mark, please do step in and stop me if I get this wrong here, but my own belief is that there is very little expectation of any further changes to the 1819 statement, but the possibility nonetheless, until the process is formally completed, the possibility remains, and therefore the delegation is required to be there to cover it. The standard deadline for the finalisation of the statement, of course, as we're all aware, is now long since passed. So with that passed, we default to the requirement noted in paragraph 13 for publication by the council as soon as practicable. And obviously the hope, the expectation is that that is going to be very soon after this evening. That will happen once we have received formal certification from the auditor of the conclusion of the audit. And the last thing I would wish to say, Chair, is sitting quietly in the background, I think you can see the initials HB. I'm going to embarrass her. That is Hannah, who has been working so very, very, very hard on this audit. And really, we only have the papers in front of us tonight because of all the work that Hannah has put in. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Tony. And Mark, did you want to come in now before I go to the committee? Just coming back on what Tony said there.
Thank you, Chair. So it's nice to have the opportunity. So I have no intention of making any more changes to the accounts, Tony. I'm sure you'll be delighted to sort of hear. So I'd just like to say, my own thanks to Tony and to Hannah. So they've, both on this audit and the next one, then they've really supported us throughout the whole process. Took the challenge in a really positive way, and have come back with robust and accurate technical responses. So so very much the financial statements as presented to us, despite having a significant level of audit because of the reduction in materiality, has come out unchanged. I think that's a fantastic achievement. And I suppose just on the just in general on the 1819 audit, I would like to thank Gary and Chris and James just in terms of the openness and I suppose the transparent way that they've dealt with the governance issue and the value for money conclusion issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I think we'd echo all those comments. And we love openness and transparency. We really do. So with that, I'll open it up to the committee. Any members of the committee with any questions, Councillor Clark?
Just one quick query, Chair and Tony, but on page 67, it shows the senior management structure. My recollection is that structure didn't come into being by the end of March 2019. It occurred in 2020, so I'm not sure that's the correct structure at the time.
Yeah, Chair,
Yes, go ahead, Tony.
I'm just looking, there is a reference, unless I've, goodness, page 66, somewhere in there. Senior management structure was revised in 1920. This was done within the context of the revised structure is shown in the chart below. So there is just that, there is that specific reference there. Councillor Clark is quite right, this is the new structure, but what the view was that in the context of, you know, actually presenting this narrative report now, again, it's this crossover between the 2 years, really, for the document as a whole, now at this time, to present the new structure was seen as being more helpful, more appropriate than reverting back to something which had now been superseded.
But it's factually incorrect. If we're presenting this as a public document, it's factually incorrect, because at the time I can recall that we had 2 deputy chief executives. So if we're going to present this and agree it, which I'm not going to actually, because it doesn't represent what happened in that particular year as far as the management structure was concerned.
Chair, if I could, just in terms of factual accuracy, if the chart is read in the context of that paragraph on page 66, then it is factually correct. No, this isn't the old structure, but it makes no pretense to being that. It is stated that this is the revised structure.
Thanks, Tony. I'm going to move on. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Councillor Mrs. Smith.
Thank you. If I could just have an explanation, please. It's on page 56. It's under number 9, and it's note 33. The amount of non-benefit related grants credited to services has been corrected from 1.259 million to 2.038 million, a change of 779,000, best part of $750,000. And I've gone to note 33, but I can't seem to get any explanation. It just gives me a chart. Could you just enlighten me as to why we have got a difference and what the difference is and why it came about, please? Just for interest.
Certainly, Chair. Just looking at the paragraph itself and how the difference arose. Again, it's one of those. It goes into the draft and it gets through the proofreading, and you actually see it. Well, it would probably be unfair to say 5 minutes later, but it was very soon after the draft had been in front of the committee. Looking at this, it was evident that something was astray, and I'm afraid, quite simply, it was an error in a formula on a spreadsheet. Note 33, it's not one of those that cross-checks and counterbalances and validates against any other note. It is a standalone note, and so yes, I'm afraid this one quite simply slipped the net and was spotted shortly afterwards. Now, just trying to relate it to note 33. Sorry, I'm going to have to make my way down to note 33, and that may take me a moment, I'm sorry. Unless anyone... Sorry, could I ask if anyone immediately has the page reference?
There's a 150 or 90, there's 2 numbers on it. But if you'd rather, you could always email me with the reply, Tony, if that's more helpful. It was just out of interest.
I'll have a quick look, and I think I will probably take up the suggestion of... now there is the 2038. Yes, there we are. Note 33, it's in the credited to services section, grants and contributions other. The figure, which for 1819 now appears as 2038 million, that did appear in the draft statement as 1,259,000.
Thanks, Tony. Is that all right, Councillor Mr Smith?
Yeah, I think I'll email you and ask you. It's just out of interest, and then you can email me back. Okay.
Thanks very much. Any other questions from members of the committee? Members not on the committee? Okay. Thanks very much. So we're at the end of the debate on this proposal. We have a proposer, myself, and do we have a seconder? We do have a seconder, Councillor Sharples. Chris, can you just confirm what the proposal is, because we need to vote on this?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the recommendation is at paragraph 2 of the report. The committee is recommended to, firstly, approve the audited statement of accounts for 2018-19, subject to any amendments which, in the opinion of the Chief Financial Officer, Section 151 Officer, are minor in nature, such minor amendments to be defined as non-material to the financial position of the authority. The Chief Financial Officer will exercise this delegation in consultation with the Chair of Governance Committee. In the event the Chief Financial Officer is of the opinion the amendments are material to the financial position of the authority, the Governance Committee will be reconvened to approve the new statement of accounts. The second recommendation is to consider and approve the letter of representation contained at Appendix B and to authorise the Chief Financial Officer and Chair of the Committee to sign the letter.
Thanks for that, Chris. So I'll call each member out alphabetically to vote, starting with Councillor Bretherton.
Yeah, 4.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clark.
Chairman, it's a two-part recommendation. I abstain on the first and support the second.
Councillor Amelia.
4.
Councillor Sharples.
4.
Councillor Mrs Smith. Councillor Turner.
4.
Thank you. And myself, and I'm 4. Chris, can you give us the scores on the doors?
Thank you, Chair. The recommendations at paragraph 2A and 2B are approved.
Thank you very much. That takes us on to item number 6, Audit Findings Report 2019-20. Members are advised that there's been a supplementary agenda published. Somebody needs to be muted. I'll carry on. Where was I? Page 432 in your pack includes the report of the external auditor, and also take item 6A together with this item, which can be found in the supplementary agenda pack at page 476. Mark, you're back on again.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the audit findings report for 2019-20. I'm not going to go through in any, in the detail that I went through the last report, and particularly the value for money conclusion, because the issues covered two years, it's the same. So as are the Section 24 recommendations. So I'm not going to go through that. Clearly, if members have any additional questions on that, I'm happy to take them. So what I'll do is I'll talk mainly to the financial statement audit, but I'll take you through the summary, and then I'll take you to the key points in the financial statement audit, because I'm just aware members haven't had a long time to digest this document, and then I will hand back to you, Chair. So if I could take members to page 3 of the report, which is entitled Financial Statements. So I'm pleased to report our audit is substantially complete. And I suppose I'm even happy to report that I would intend to issue an unqualified opinion on the financial statements. We have identified some minor issues within the report, but there are no material adjustments to the financial statements. We did find some. There's a typo there. That should say debtors rather than dentors. So apologies for that. So we did find some debtors which had then had a credit note issued against them. The usual audit technique is to then extrapolate that about, well, what could the quantum be in terms of the error, which we estimated to be about £166,000. That clearly isn't the level of error. The error is much smaller of that. I think it's about £30,000. So that's not material in my view to the financial statements. So that would allow me to issue an unqualified opinion on the accounts. The issues that we discussed before were still there and prevalent, at least at the start of 2019-20, and it was difficult to discern when they actually stopped during 2019-20. So, clearly risks around management override of control, the leisure pension liability that I talked to earlier, that obviously still there because we've done the audit at the same time. And then there's the issue with the campus. So in terms of completion of the audit, item 1's clear now. Item 2, item 3, the bank confirmation. We've done the majority of our samples now. We've just got some work on housing benefits to do tomorrow morning. The trial balance is done, and we need to do the cash flow notes tomorrow morning. So we are, we're very much, the audit is substantially complete now, which I actually believe is a remarkable achievement given where we were at the last audit committee. And it is, my thanks again to Tony and Hannah, just in terms of everything they've done to support us. What you'll find within this audit opinion is something called an emphasis of matter. So an emphasis of matter isn't a qualification on the opinion. It's something that we do when we want to draw a reader's attention to a matter in the financial statements. What we've found this year is that in response to the uncertainty created by COVID, that the valuers, whether it's the valuation of your own property, the council's investment properties and other land and buildings, or whether it's the valuation of the property that's held by the pension fund on behalf of the council and the other admitted bodies, the valuers have put what's called a material uncertainty within their valuation reports, which basically say we've complied with the RICS guidance in terms of valuing the properties, but there's so much flux in the market that it's difficult to say with the values may not have been skewed by COVID and may not be actually somewhat different to what they've reported. It's just to draw it to your attention. It literally is in every local government set of accounts across the country, but there is that uncertainty there that's been caused by COVID. So that's my summary of the financial statements. So we would intend to issue an unqualified opinion there. So the next page, page 4, just deals with COVID. It has been a very unusual audit. We've had to do it remotely. I've spent time with Hannah and Tony on the phone as the internet went up and down. So that was a fascinating experience trying to audit it. But again, we've got through it, and I'm satisfied with both the quality of the audit and the quality of the financial statements and the supporting working papers that's been provided to us. Page 5 just deals with the value for money conclusion and the statutory recommendations again. As I said, an adverse VFM conclusion and statutory recommendations. And then I'll quickly just take you through the rest of the report, if I may now, Chair. So if I just turn you to page 8, just to management override of control, just to re-emphasise, nothing's changed in terms of the control over journals. I do think that's a significant risk to you as an authority, and I would hope to see those controls put in place as soon as possible. Page 9, which is on property valuation, that just gives you a bit more detail in terms of the emphasis of matter paragraph and sort of the valuation and where we've got to. Page 12 just deals with COVID in a bit more detail and just tells you what we've actually been doing to make sure that we can give a true and fair view of the council's accounts. But again, I thought that went well in the circumstances. Page 13, which deals with business rate appeals. So the issues that I had flagged in the 18-19 report, they've actually been resolved now, and the net percentage provision is actually 4% for as of the 31st of March 2020. I think that's appropriate, and so you can see that the assessment has changed from yellow to green. Page 14. Well, you actually valued less of your other land and buildings in 1920 than you did in 18-19. In fact, you valued 3 of your other land and buildings. I do think that's something that you need to look at as a council, just to make sure that you are updating your valuations on an appropriate basis. And then just onto page 16, you can see that I'd flagged under page 16 that our work was ongoing in terms of investment properties. I'm happy to report that that's been concluded now. And then finally, just onto page 18, just to reiterate that the leisure service pension liability, that's as relevant to the 2019-20 accounts as it was to the 2018-19 accounts, and I would urge the council to get that resolved as soon as it possibly can. So in summary, Chair, a high quality set of financial statements, which will get an unqualified opinion, and an adverse opinion in terms of value for money because of some of the governance issues we discussed earlier on in this meeting, and then statutory recommendations in terms of those same governance issues. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Mark. So straight over to members of the committee with any questions, if they have any. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Thank you very much for going through that. I'm on page 33 regarding the GDPR. I'm just wondering exactly how far down the road we are with complying with them. All the regulations. You did mention earlier in the meeting that if we do fall foul of them, you can have serious penalties. And do we have some issues there that we still need to resolve? Thank you.
I think officers are probably better placed to say exactly where you are. But if you look at the detail on page 33, so GDPR deals with many sort of areas. So the areas that I flagged are around sort of how you control the data. So you have information asset owners who are supposed to follow set procedures so that you're secure in your management of the data. Those procedures still aren't in place, and then you need to sort of work through your contracts to see how your suppliers are dealing with the data that you provide to them, because you're legally responsible to ensure that they're compliant on your behalf with GDPR. So I could see the progress that the council had made. It needs to make faster progress.
Thanks, Mark. Chris, do you just want to come in on that as well?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Mark was right to highlight it again. We had formed a management group, a leadership group, to deal with the GDPR issues. They met on Thursday last week with an update on the progress against the management action plan, and it is substantially complete now. There is a small amount of training still outstanding, including training for one councillor. there is still the piece of work in relation to contracts is ongoing, but it is in hand. So legal services have been supporting different teams around the council in relation to the contracts and to how data is being dealt with externally. But the vast majority of the management actions are now completed, and when the follow-up audit is taken place by internal audit, we expect to demonstrate that actually we're in full compliance now. Funny thing how these things work out. Some of the delays have actually helped, which sounds a bit strange, but the forthcoming Brexit has meant that a lot of the work that we've had to do in the last 6 months we would have had to have done anyway. It doesn't help us with compliance back in 1819 and 1920, but we've had to do these pieces of work in relation to our status as an accredited country going forward or not. So it's actually work that it's had double benefit for the council being done now.
Thank you, that's very interesting. So we can more or less say that we are now almost compliant?
Yes. Yes, yeah, and we will demonstrate it next time we're audited.
Thanks very much for that. Councillor Clark.
Thanks once again, Mark, for the report. Because of its late arrival with me, I fast read it, but it suggests to me that there have been quite a few improvements since last year, and yet the recommendations under section 24 remain the same. Are you expecting a separate response to those recommendations as opposed to the earlier recommendations for the previous year?
No, Councillor, I'm not. I did think hard about whether did I put it 1 year and not the other, or or did I sort of move it across both years? And as I said earlier, so the control environment didn't improve, at least for the early part of 2019-20, and I'm not convinced it's wholly fixed as we sit here now. So so the GDPR is still has been fixed now, but we're in the latter part of 2021. So and then there's issues around creditors that there's only going to be a follow up to the internal audit report in the next couple of months. So and those issues around procurement and creditors have been there for a substantial amount of time. So I recognise your comment. I did think about it quite hard about whether it was fair to issue the same form of conclusion and the same statutory recommendations across both years, but I believe it's warranted. I don't think there was a substantial improvement or a sufficient substantial improvement between years. I still think the Council has some way to go in terms of fixing these matters, and I'd hope that you would focus on that in the next few months.
For my benefit, Mark, could you give me an indication of how soon you expect the Council to respond to these recommendations?
I'd expect you to respond early in the new year. It depends on the how you when your next full council is, councillor. So I'm not going to kind of sort of ask you to change your governance procedures, but I would hope that you would have a draft response to me sometime in January, and that you would take it through full council at the earliest opportunity.
Thanks for that. Questions from councillors not on the committee? Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Chair. Couple of brief points. In answer to Councillor Clark's question, I can confirm to you, Chair, and the committee and the external auditor, Mark, that this will be going to the section 24 will be going to the January council meeting for full public debate. So that's in the third week of January, Mark. So we're going to deal with this instantly. We need to. In respect to the comments about 1920 also being subject to a section 24, it isn't any surprise to me. I think it would not have stood up to any level of scrutiny anywhere that just overnight these major governance challenges, failings, whatever wording you want to use, that the council was facing, that just were miraculously fixed overnight, because it's impossible to do so. And I think it's the council, if it's going to do this, must do this properly. And so I thank Mark. I agree with him. We're almost there now. I think it's fair to say there's a detailed management action plan, you'll all recall, associated with the annual governance statement from 1920, and that's closely monitored by the cabinet and the statutory officers. So we're just going to move forward. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Foster, and I think the entire committee would be very pleased to hear that we are making progress. That was much needed, but we're making progress. Any other comments or questions from members not on the committee? No? Great. Okay, this is just a note, so no votes required. And we can move on to the final item for this evening, which is item number 7, Audit Statement of Accounts 2019-20 and Letter of Representation. Members are advised that there has been a supplementary agenda published for this item. Page 244 in your pack includes the report of the Deputy Director of Finance. The Letter of Representation is at page 482 and amendments to the Statement of Accounts for 2019-20 at page 488. Tony, I think you're going to be presenting this item to us. Wait for him to appear on screen. Might be just making a coffee.
No.
Oh, he's back. Here he is, don't worry.
For some reason.
Okay.
But the problem was probably my fingers. The buttons didn't seem to respond for a moment. Thank you, Chair. Right, okay. Well, in terms of the substance of the accounts, I probably have rather less to say about 1920 than I did about 1819, because first of all, clearly the committee have seen the draft much more recently for 1920, and as Mark has already covered, really nothing has changed within the body of the accounts. So the key figures to match those for 1819, if we go to page 290, and that one question that everyone wants asking at the bottom of the table on that page, did we finish the year with more or less money than we started it? Well, the answer is £1.294 million more in the revenue reserves. The opening balance of 19.519, which will be familiar from item 5, is there, and so at the end of the year that has become 20,813,000, and the breakdown of that into the earmarked and general reserves is on page 311, and it is 16.6 million and 4.2 million respectively. Again, the figures are completely unchanged from what was in front of the committee at the end of August. There is a list of amendments that have been made since the draft was sent out. My apologies if it appeared to be of startling length at first. I realise there are 3 pages of it, but the table that matters is only the 2/3 of that first page. The rest is just to make sure that members have in front of them the full text of some of the additional disclosures that were made. Wouldn't normally expect to make quite that many changes between circulating the document and the meeting of the committee, but that again is a reflection of the sense of the importance of getting this to the committee in time for this meeting. So the document was posted out, perhaps you could say just that little bit earlier than would normally be the case, but only a little bit. And the changes themselves, as members will note, are relatively minor in nature. Likewise, Mark highlighted before the number of issues that do still remain. So clearly the possibility that delegation to the chair and section 151 to make any further changes, there is slightly greater possibility that will be needed for 1920 than was the case with 1819, though again I would hope and expect that it won't be needed for this one either. Nevertheless, important that we have it there. And with that, Chair, again, I'm happy to go further around the accounts as members may wish, or to take any questions there may be. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Members of the committee, any questions or comments at this time? Councillor Clark.
Just one question, Chair and Tony. On page 155, we've got the remaining actions that are required. Have those actions now been completed? And we've got in it TBC, which I interpret as being to be confirmed. Can we not possibly put dates in for these things?
Sorry, Chair. Are we back in the audit?
Page 155, Tony.
155. Sorry, can I ask, are we back in the audit line?
Sorry, it's 404 actually. I'm
404.
I'm reading it on landscape and it's 155 on there. 404 then.
404. I promise I'll be there in a moment. 404. We're in the annual governance report.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. The annual governance report is reproduced here exactly as it was presented to the committee in June. So I don't know if perhaps I might hand this one over to Chris. I'm not sure.
You're querying, Councillor Clark, the review of the structures and processes. That was is there the missing date?
It's 5E. 5E.
Yeah.
What remaining actions are required?
Right. Okay. Now you're asking. They are pretty much the communication strategy has been developed and was with Cabinet last week and has been approved. The consultation framework and community engagement strategy, that is a piece of work that's still ongoing. The approach to monitoring and managing implementation of management actions, that has been completed, and we've set up a system to ensure that those are being monitored. And the review and update of the Council's HR policies has been completed, and the developer partnerships framework, I think that's going to be presented early in the new year. So of the ones that are to be confirmed, everything's completed except the ones that I've just mentioned.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Chris. Any other questions for members of the committee? No, members not on the committee. Can't see any, in which case that brings us to the end of this item, and this is something that we need to vote on. So we have a proposer, and do we have a seconder for this?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Sharples. Chris, can you please confirm the proposal?
If I can find the... Yeah, there we go. It's a two-part recommendation, Chair, at paragraph 2A and 2B. I won't read through the full lot again. It's exactly the same as the recommendation that committee voted on the last occasion, except it's for the year 1920 rather than 1819.
Are we okay with that, committee? Yeah, okay. We'll do it in the same way. So I'll call you all out individually. So, Councillor Bretherton? 4. Thank you. Councillor Clark?
4.
Councillor Amelia?
4.
Councillor Sharples.
4.
Councillor Smith. Councillor Turner.
4.
And I'm 4 as well. Chris?
The recommendation has been approved, Chair.
Well, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of this rearranged Governance Committee meeting. Thank you very much indeed for all the hard work that's gone on. Tony, Hannah and Mark, thank you very much. It's been a long time getting to this point. We're all glad we're here and that we can move on. We've already covered and talked about the issues that we know were there before, but we're working hard to address and put right, and we will do. So with that, I want to wish everybody a happy Christmas and stay safe. We'll see you all next year.
Thank you, Chair.
Happy Christmas, everybody.